Donald Rumsfeld became the United States Secretary of Defense in January 2001. He was a seasoned politician with previous experience in the Ford administration. When terrorists attacked the United States on September 11, 2001, Rumsfeld was thrust into a central role. The Bush administration, with Rumsfeld as a key figure, faced the daunting task of responding to the attacks and preventing future threats. While the immediate focus was on al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, the Bush administration quickly shifted its attention to Iraq. Even as the dust settled at Ground Zero in the Pentagon, President Bush expressed a strong belief that Iraq was behind the 9/11 attacks. This belief, however, was not supported by intelligence agencies. Despite the lack of evidence linking Saddam Hussein to 9/11, President Bush, in conversations with Tony Blair and Prince Bandar, indicated his intention to target Iraq. Rumsfeld, as a close advisor to the president, would have been privy to these conversations and the administration's evolving focus on Iraq. Rumsfeld's role in these early discussions remains unclear. However, his presence and influence in the Bush administration were undeniable. As the administration began to formulate its response to 9/11, the focus on Iraq, despite the lack of evidence connecting it to the attacks, became increasingly apparent. This shift in focus, influenced in part by Rumsfeld's hawkish stance, would have significant consequences in the years to come. The Bush administration, with Rumsfeld as a prominent voice, began to publicly connect Iraq to the 9/11 attacks. This narrative, despite the lack of credible evidence, gained traction with the American public, who were reeling from the shock and horror of the attacks. Rumsfeld, known for his assertive and often blunt communication style, played a role in shaping public perception. His statements, while not explicitly linking Iraq to 9/11, often hinted at the possibility, feeding into the administration's broader narrative. The administration's efforts to connect Iraq to 9/11 were part of a larger strategy to build public support for military action against Saddam Hussein. By repeatedly raising the specter of Iraq's involvement in 9/11, the Bush administration created an environment of fear and suspicion. This environment made it easier for the administration to justify its aggressive stance towards Iraq, even in the absence of concrete evidence. The impact of the administration's rhetoric was evident in public opinion polls. A 2003 Washington Post poll found that a significant percentage of Americans believed Saddam Hussein was personally involved in the 9/11 attacks. This belief, fueled by the administration's misleading statements, highlighted the success of the Bush administration's efforts to shape public perception. The lack of a robust challenge to this narrative from within the administration, including from Rumsfeld, allowed these misconceptions to take root. The Bush administration's focus on Iraq culminated in the 2003 invasion. Rumsfeld, as Secretary of Defense, played a pivotal role in planning and executing the invasion. He advocated for a smaller, more agile invasion force, a decision that, while initially successful, later contributed to the difficulties in stabilizing post-invasion Iraq. Rumsfeld's confidence in the military's ability to quickly topple Saddam Hussein's regime proved to be misplaced. The Iraq War, justified in part by the false premise of Iraq's involvement in 9/11 and its supposed possession of weapons of mass destruction, proved to be long and costly. The war had a devastating impact on Iraq, leading to instability, violence, and the rise of sectarian conflict. The lack of a clear exit strategy, coupled with the failure to find weapons of mass destruction, fueled criticism of the war and Rumsfeld's role in it. Rumsfeld's handling of the war, particularly the lack of post-invasion planning and the Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal, further tarnished his reputation. His resignation in 2006 did little to quell the growing anti-war sentiment. The Iraq War, a war launched on false pretenses and miscalculations, would become a defining event of the Bush presidency and cast a long shadow over Rumsfeld's legacy. Donald Rumsfeld's legacy remains deeply intertwined with the Iraq War. His role in shaping the Bush administration's response to 9/11, particularly the decision to invade Iraq, continues to be debated and scrutinized. While some argue that Rumsfeld was a decisive leader who kept America safe in the aftermath of 9/11, others contend that his actions were reckless and ultimately detrimental to U.S. interests. The Iraq War, a war launched on false pretenses and marred by miscalculations, had a profound impact on the Middle East and beyond. The war destabilized the region, fueled sectarian violence and created a power vacuum that contributed to the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. The human cost of the war, both in terms of Iraqi civilian casualties and the toll on U.S. service members and their families, is immeasurable. Rumsfeld's legacy is a complex one. He was a man of conviction who held strong beliefs about America's role in the world. However, his unwavering confidence in his own judgment, coupled with his willingness to disregard dissenting opinions, ultimately led to disastrous consequences. The Iraq War, a war that he helped to orchestrate, will forever be a stain on his record.